On a night like any other, Emily Sanders, a young nurse barely staying afloat, makes a decision that changes everything. A man is brought into her ER under silence and blood, no name, no past, just a pulse. She saves him. Then he vanishes. Days later, men in suits show up. The name they whisper? Ryan Callahan. The city knows that name and fears it. What began as an act of instinct becomes a step into a world where power hides behind glass towers and secrets kill in silence. She saved his life. Now he's about to change hers forever. But at what cost? Stay with us. What follows is a story of quiet trust, buried scars, and the kind of connection that might just save them both. Emily Sanders was halfway through scribbling a dosage on a patient chart when the double doors of the emergency room swung open and two men rushed in with a stretcher. There was no shouting, no panicked explanation, only a low command from one of them. No questions, just stabilize him. The man's tone was like a key turning in a lock, firm, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Emily felt her pen freeze mid-stroke as she saw the outline under his jacket, the kind of shape you only recognized after too many news stories and whispered warnings. The patient on the stretcher was barely conscious, his head rolling to one side, a crimson stain creeping across a white linen shirt so fine it looked alien against the ER's worn sheets. No one asked who he was. No one dared. Emily's colleagues glanced at each other, weighing risk against duty, and in that moment she moved first, pulling on gloves and barking orders for saline and vitals. She didn't think about policies or paperwork. She thought about how the man's breathing hitched, as if every inhale might be his last. Instinct overrode hesitation, and she found herself at the center of a storm no one else wanted to touch. As they wheeled him into a curtained bay, Emily tried to get even a scrap of information. Allergies, pre-existing conditions, she asked, her voice sharper than usual to cut through their silence. The taller of the two men gave a single glance at his companion, then back at her. "Just keep him alive," he said flatly. There was no plea in his voice, only an expectation, as if saving him were inevitable. Before she could press further, they melted back toward the doors, leaving only the faint scent of cologne and the echo of boots on tile. Emily turned to the man on the gurney, his face pale but striking, dark hair plastered to his forehead. A gold ring glimmered faintly on his pinky, its design unfamiliar but expensive. She felt a tug of something she couldn't name, responsibility maybe, or the eerie sense of stepping into someone else's story. She clipped a pulse oximeter to his finger, adjusted the IV line and whispered, "Stay with me, okay?" Though she doubted he could hear. It wasn't protocol. It was human reflex. The monitors beeped back unevenly, like a coded message she couldn't decipher. Minutes turned to hours. Emily moved around him with a precision born of exhaustion and resolve, checking vitals, drawing blood, adjusting fluids. The night staff thinned out, distracted by minor crises, but she remained with him as if tied to the bed by an invisible thread. Every time she glanced at the monitors, she felt a surge of quiet defiance. She would not lose him, not tonight. She found no ID beyond a makeshift wristband scrawled with the letters RC and a folded business card tucked into his inner pocket, blank on one side, embossed with a single number on the other. She didn't dial it. She couldn't. Instead, she pressed gauze to a wound on his side, murmuring soft encouragements as if he were a child trying to stay awake. At one point, his eyes flickered open just a fraction, a sliver of green beneath heavy lids. He tried to speak, but only a rasp escaped, a sound like paper tearing. She bent closer, thinking she might catch a name, but it dissolved into a cough. She squeezed his hand without realizing she'd done it, her thumb brushing cold skin that somehow still radiated life. Around 5 a.m., when the city outside was caught between night and morning, Emily felt her body moving on autopilot. She had stabilized him, Pressure controlled, fluids balanced, oxygen holding steady. He was still unconscious, but the death rattle quality of his breathing had eased. She charted each update. Though she doubted anyone would read it, the hospital felt like a hollow shell at that hour. But inside that curtained space, it was just her and this stranger whose presence defied anonymity. She found herself speaking to him in low tones about nothing, how her shift had been endless, how she'd once dreamed of working pediatrics, how she hated coffee but drank it anyway. It was absurd, confiding in a man who couldn't hear, but it anchored her. When another nurse poked her head in, Emily waved her off. "I've got him," she said firmly, and she did. For reasons she couldn't articulate, she had taken ownership of his survival like a secret vow. When his pulse strengthened under her fingertips, she almost smiled. It felt like winning a battle no one knew she was fighting. By the time the first shafts of daylight bled into the hallway, Emily finally let herself step back. She peeled off her gloves, flexing her stiff fingers. The man's vitals were stable, his color improved. He would live, at least for now. She stood there a moment, staring at his face, trying to imagine the life that owned such a ring, such a shirt, such a dangerous entourage. Who was he to warrant this secrecy? What chain of events had led him to collapse on her watch? She felt the tremor in her own hands and shoved them into her pockets. It wasn't her job to wonder. Her job was done. And yet she hesitated to leave, as though walking out might undo all the fragile work she had done to keep him here. "You'll be okay," she whispered, not sure if it was a promise or a plea. She turned, gathering her chart, her bag, her courage, and walked toward the locker room without looking back. When Emily returned to the bay at the end of her shift, the bed was empty. No patient, no chart, no trace. The monitors were dark, the sheets stripped, as if he had never been there at all. She felt her stomach drop, the world tilt. "Where's the guy from Bay 4? She asked the clerk at the desk. The woman blinked at her, confused. "What guy?" Emily stepped closer. "Tall, dark hair, gunshot wound." The clerk shook her head. "We don't have anyone like that on the log." Emily turned back toward the empty room, a hollow space where an entire night had vanished. She pressed her hand to her forehead, realizing it was trembling. She had saved a man whose name she didn't know, and now he was gone like smoke. As she walked out into the pale morning, clutching her bag, she had no idea that in choosing instinct over indifference, she had crossed an invisible line between the safe world she thought she knew and the dangerous one she had unknowingly entered. 3 days had passed. Emily told herself she'd moved on, that the mysterious man with the gold ring and the stitched-up side was just another anomaly in the chaos of a city that didn't stop bleeding. She had documented him like every other patient, filed what little she could, and tried to let the silence fill in the rest. But the silence didn't last. That Monday, she noticed the black car. It wasn't parked directly in front of her building, but across the street, tucked neatly along the curb. Its windows were tinted too dark to see inside, its engine always off, and its presence just still enough to unsettle. The first day, she thought it was coincidence. The second, maybe paranoia. But by the third, she stopped trying to explain it away. The same car, same spot, no movement. No license plate she could memorize, just stillness, like a held breath that never let go. She pulled the curtain in her small kitchen halfway, enough to see without being seen, and watched as the sun dipped below the horizon. It didn't move. Neither did she. When she left for her night shift, it was still there, headlights off, waiting. Emily kept her head down that night. She pushed meds, checked charts, ran from one screaming alert to the next. But behind every task was the question she couldn't shake. Who was in that car, and why hadn't they made a move? When she finally stepped outside to grab coffee near midnight, she saw them. 2 men, both in dark suits, leaning casually against the car as if they'd always belonged there. They didn't look like they were waiting for a cab. They didn't look like anyone she wanted to know. "Miss Sanders?" one of them asked as she approached the sidewalk. She froze mid-step, instinctively shifting her weight back. "Depends who's asking," she replied, her voice flatter than she meant it to be. The second man stepped forward, hand in his coat pocket, not threatening, but ready. "Ryan Callahan would like to see you." The name hit like a gut punch. Emily didn't answer right away. Callahan wasn't just a name. It was a whisper that followed money, fear, and politics in the dark alleys of Detroit. It was the name sewn into construction companies with no real offices, the name at the bottom of contracts no one questioned. She stood still for a moment, letting it sink in. Ryan Callahan, the patient with the silk shirt and the shallow breath, the ghost that disappeared before morning rounds. Her first instinct was to deny everything, to say they had the wrong person, that she had no idea who that was. But lying felt stupid, and Emily had never been good at pretending. "Tell him I'm busy," she finally said, brushing past them. The first man didn't try to stop her, only reached into his coat and handed her a card. It was black, matte, no logo, just a name pressed in silver foil. Ryan Callahan. Beneath it, a number. That was it. She took it reluctantly, shoving it into her pocket without a word. They didn't follow. She walked the rest of the way to the hospital's break room with her hands shaking and didn't touch the coffee she bought. Later that night, in the staff bathroom with the door locked, she pulled the card from her scrubs and stared at it. It looked ordinary, but her fingers refused to bend around her phone. She waited until her shift ended, and she was home, alone, in the dim light of her bedroom. Then she dialed. The phone rang once, twice, then, "Emily Sanders," said the voice on the other end, like it had been waiting. Her spine straightened involuntarily. "You shouldn't know my name," she said too sharply. "I know everything I need to know about the woman who kept me alive," he replied. His voice was smooth but not soft, a quiet storm held in glass. She could hear it, calm wrapped around power. "I'm not sure why I called," she admitted, already regretting it. "Then let me give you a reason," he said. "You saved me, Emily. That's not the kind of thing someone like me forgets." There was a pause, the kind that felt intentional. "And now someone's watching you. I'm not the only one who noticed what you did." Her stomach dropped. "Is that supposed to scare me?" she asked, though it already had. "No," he said. "It's supposed to tell you the truth. You stepped into something that doesn't let people walk away clean." Another pause. "I'm offering you a kind of protection you didn't know you needed." She swallowed hard. "This isn't protection. This is surveillance." His voice didn't flinch. "In my world, there's not much of a difference." She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. But when he gave her an address and a time, she wrote it down. The top floor of a building she'd only ever seen from the freeway. One of those glittering towers that seemed like they belonged to another version of the city. She spent the next afternoon trying to convince herself not to go. But by 5:45, she was there, being led to a rooftop terrace by a man with a thin earpiece and no name tag. The sun was setting behind the skyline when she stepped into the open air and saw him. Ryan Callahan, alive, upright, dressed in a dark suit like nothing had ever touched him. But something had, his eyes. They held shadows that didn't come from buildings. "Emily," he said, like the word itself could calm a storm. "Thank you for coming." She walked toward him slowly, unsure of whether this counted as bravery or stupidity. "Why me?" she asked. He didn't smile. "Because now you're part of something you didn't choose. And whether you like it or not, they've seen your face." That was the moment she understood. There would be no undoing what she had done, and no safety in pretending otherwise. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the quiet war behind his posture, the kind of alertness that came from growing up with threats instead of lullabies. She thought about how absurd it was, that her job had been to keep people breathing, and now she was face to face with a man who'd lived 1,000 lives in the hours he'd been missing. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, not knowing if it was a lie. "You should be," he answered softly. But there was no menace in it, only fact. "I didn't come here to scare you, Emily. I came here because I owe you something, and because you deserve to hear this from me, not from someone with a weapon and an order." He stepped closer, just enough for her to see the tension in his jaw. "This city eats people who aren't paying attention. You kept me alive when others would have looked away. Now I'm asking you to pay attention." He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't tell her to leave. He just stood there, waiting for her to realize what she already knew. She was no longer a bystander. She was already part of something far bigger than she could control. Emily couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when she stopped being just a nurse and became something more, something vulnerable, exposed. The days after her rooftop meeting with Ryan blurred into cautious routines and half-finished thoughts. She still went to work. She still gave patients their meds, still charted vitals, but there was a tension now, a pulse beneath the skin of her life that never quieted. Then the footsteps started. At first, she told herself it was coincidence, shifts ending late, shared sidewalks, people walking in the same direction. But by the third night, she wasn't telling herself anything. The man always stayed just far enough behind to avoid confrontation, but close enough to match her pace. No phone, no cigarettes, just shadowing her through empty streets. That's when she knew she wasn't being observed anymore. She was being followed, and it wasn't curiosity, it was threat. The hospital parking lot was nearly deserted when she heard the sound of approaching tires and saw the familiar, sleek silhouette slide into view. Ryan didn't say her name. He didn't need to. He stepped out, coat unbuttoned, gaze fixed. She didn't ask why he was there. He didn't ask if she wanted to leave. He just opened the door. She got in. She didn't ask where they were going, and he didn't offer an explanation. There was a strange comfort in that. How naturally silence filled the space between them. In another context, maybe it would have been awkward. Here it felt like strategy. She studied him from the corner of her eye as the car cut through the city. He looked exactly like he had on the rooftop, controlled, composed, calculating. But there was something in the way his jaw tensed when his phone buzzed in his pocket, only for him to ignore it without even glancing. "I didn't think I'd see you again," she said finally, breaking the quiet. "I told you, I owe you." He didn't look at her when he spoke. "People in my world repay debts, sometimes with gratitude, sometimes with silence." She shifted in her seat. "And what about people who don't want to be in your world?" That made him glance over. His eyes weren't angry, just tired. "They usually don't get to choose, not after they're seen." She thought about the man following her, about the name on that black card, about the way her life no longer fit into the spaces it used to. The building they pulled up to wasn't one she recognized. It wasn't flashy, not the kind of place you'd expect someone like Ryan Callahan to frequent. But when they entered through a private elevator and reached the top floor, she understood. The terrace was massive, surrounded by walls of glass that seemed to disappear into the skyline. He led her outside without ceremony, the city sprawling below them like a sleeping animal. She didn't speak. Neither did he. He poured 2 glasses of something she didn't ask for and handed one to her. She didn't drink. "This is where I come when I want to remember what it feels like to breathe," he said, eyes scanning the horizon. "Or pretend I still have choices." Emily looked at him, unsure if she was supposed to respond. "Why bring me here?" she asked. "Because this is the closest thing I have to honesty," he replied. "Everywhere else is rooms within rooms, lies wrapped in smiles. But here it's just steel, glass and gravity. It can't be bought, threatened or manipulated. It just is." She understood, in a way. A nurse's station at 3 a.m. wasn't so different. Raw places that didn't pretend to be something else. He leaned against the railing, fingers wrapped around his untouched drink. "You saved me that night," he said, more to the air than to her. and for the first time in a long time, I didn't know what to do with that. Emily stepped closer, the wind tugging at loose strands of her hair. "You're not used to being helped?" He shook his head. "I'm not used to anything being real. In my world, everyone wants something. You didn't." She shrugged. "I wanted you to live. That's part of the job." He looked over, expression unreadable. "But you didn't walk away after. You noticed the car. You saw the men. You kept the card." She hesitated, unsure if it was an accusation. "Would it have mattered if I threw it out?" He nodded slowly. "They still would have come. You just wouldn't have had warning." The air between them shifted, no longer cautious, no longer theoretical. Just the unspoken truth that her involvement had never really been a choice. "What exactly is it that I've walked into?" she asked, voice low. Ryan studied her for a long moment before answering. "An empire," he said, "but not the kind people write about in business magazines. The kind that moves through real estate, through backroom contracts, through quiet disappearances. My father built it, I inherited it whether I wanted to or not." She considered that. "You don't want it?" He laughed, but it was empty. "Wanting doesn't factor into it. Legacy isn't earned, it's imposed. They see my name and think they know what I am. But my name was written for me long before I learned to speak it." Emily thought of the quiet weight her own name carried, her mother's sacrifices, her father's absence. She said nothing. Ryan turned back to the edge, his voice quieter now. "I brought you here because I needed you to see that underneath all of it, behind the Callahan name, the suits, the men, there's still just a man trying to be someone else, trying to be someone at all." And for the first time, she saw it. Not the empire, but the prison it created around him. Emily didn't reply right away. She stepped to the railing beside him, setting her untouched glass down on the ledge. The city pulsed below them, alive with people who would never know the things she'd just heard, things she could never unhear. She turned her head slightly, catching the side of his face in the blue-gray twilight. "You don't owe me anything," she said finally. "I didn't save you for that." He didn't look surprised. "That's exactly why it matters." There was a stillness in him now, a quiet settling of something restless. She realized then that he wasn't just showing her a place. He was offering her context, a key, a warning, and maybe in some broken way a confession. Emily had never wanted to be part of anyone's story, not like this. But standing beside him, knowing what she knew now, she couldn't walk away and pretend. She couldn't go back to being just a nurse who saved a stranger. She had seen too much, heard too much, felt too much. And as she left that terrace with him, not saying another word, she understood. She was no longer just a witness. She was entangled in the life of a man trying to escape the very name that defined him. Emily had convinced herself quite naively that after the rooftop meeting with Ryan, she could somehow return to her old life. That she could tuck everything she'd seen and heard into a hidden mental drawer and go back to her routines, her patients, her coffee breaks, her one-bedroom apartment with the leaky faucet and flickering hallway light. But denial is a fragile defense against inevitability. She had just finished brushing her teeth that night when she heard the faint creak of something outside her door. At first, she froze, holding her breath, every sound amplified by fear. Then came the knock, sharp, deliberate. She moved slowly, quietly peeking through the peephole. 3 men stood in the hallway, not police, not neighbors, men in dark coats, 2 looking at the door, 1 watching the stairwell. When she didn't answer, they spoke. "Emily Sanders," one of them called, his voice too familiar with her name, like he had practiced saying it. "We just want to talk." Her pulse kicked up. She backed away, fumbling for her phone, but she already knew no one would get there in time. She was alone, except she wasn't, not really. Somewhere deep down, she already knew who would come for her. They waited. They didn't knock again. It was worse that way, more calculated, more patient, like they were confident she'd break first. And when she didn't, when she stood shaking behind the door with her phone in hand and no clue who to call, they spoke again, this time with precision. "We know you were at the mansion. We know you saw him. We just want to know what he told you." That was when it clicked. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about Ryan. And they weren't here to reason. They were here to erase loose ends. She stepped back further into the apartment, heart racing, considering the window, the fire escape, anything. But she didn't get the chance to run, because suddenly headlights flooded the street outside. A heavy car door opened below. Then a voice, low and commanding, sliced through the growing tension. "Leave, now!" It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The men outside paused. One of them cursed. Another one muttered something about wrong time, and "We're not ready for this." She crept to the edge of the window, her fingers trembling against the glass as she watched the men scatter down the stairs like rats sensing fire. She didn't need to see the car to know who it was, and when the knock came again, just one this time, she opened the door. Ryan stood there, his expression unreadable, but his presence unmistakable. The man she had seen on the terrace, speaking softly of legacies and cages, was gone. The one before her now was armor. His suit was sharp, his movements deliberate, and his eyes were cold, not lifeless but calculating, like a man who had stepped into the version of himself he spent his whole life trying to outrun. "You all right?" he asked. No emotion, just assessment. She nodded, but the words got stuck in her throat. He scanned the hallway once more, then gestured for her to follow. "You're not safe here anymore." She hesitated, still barefoot, still in her pajamas. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere they won't look yet," he said. "Get what you need." "You've got 60 seconds. She stared at him, caught between panic and disbelief. "You knew they were coming." His eyes met hers. "They're always coming. The question is whether I get there first." That was the moment she stopped being surprised by what he knew, and started wondering what he hadn't told her. Inside the armored car, silence stretched like a wall between them. She clutched a duffel bag. She barely had time to pack. Phone charger, scrubs, the black card with his name still tucked inside. He didn't speak until they were halfway across the city. "They weren't sent to ask questions," he said flatly. "They were sent to find out what you know and make sure it doesn't leave this city." She swallowed, throat dry. "I didn't tell anyone. I don't even know what I'm involved in." He looked over at her, something dangerous flickering in his expression. "That's the problem, Emily. You don't need to talk. Your silence is already louder than their secrets can afford." She felt her fingers clench tighter around the bag. "So what am I now? A liability?" His jaw tensed. "No. You're leverage, and that makes you valuable, but also disposable. To them." She stared out the window, watching familiar streets blur into neighborhoods she didn't recognize. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "Why do you care?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. "Because the moment you saved me, you became visible. And in my world, being visible is the first step to being erased." They arrived at another building, not the terrace, not the mansion, but a place she didn't recognize. Secure, anonymous. He led her inside without ceremony, gave orders to a man posted by the entrance, then turned back to her. "You'll stay here tonight. No one knows this location except me." And that's how it stays. She followed him up 2 flights of stairs, past hallways that felt too clean, too empty, until they reached a locked door. He punched in a code. "You'll have clothes, food. There's a phone, but it's isolated. No internet, no GPS." She stepped inside, looked around. "A safe house?" she asked. "Of sorts," he said. "It's where people go when they can't afford to be found." She turned toward him, frustration boiling beneath her fear. "I never asked for this, Ryan. I just did my job." His expression softened, just enough to make her breath catch. "And I never asked to be saved, but now we're both in it, and pretending otherwise won't change a damn thing." For the first time, she saw the fatigue behind his sharpness. And in that moment, Emily realized she had become something more than a witness. She was a vulnerability he couldn't afford, and a risk someone was already trying to erase. It wasn't until he left, and she was alone in that silent, sterile room, that the full weight of it hit her. Emily Sanders, the night nurse who once believed her job ended when the bleeding stopped, was now living inside a war she couldn't name. A war fought with shadows, silences, and secrets people would kill to protect. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her hands still trembling, heart pounding with the aftershock of it all. She thought about the way the men had said her name, like it belonged to them, like she'd already signed some contract with her blood. And then she remembered Ryan's voice cutting through that tension like a scalpel, the way the attackers had backed away without resistance, just from his presence. That's when it sank in, fully, deeply. This wasn't about gratitude anymore. It wasn't even about survival. She had crossed a line, and she couldn't go back. Emily wasn't just the nurse who saved someone important. She was now a piece, small, maybe, but invaluable, on a board where men like Ryan moved in shadows. And there were people willing to kill her simply for the fact that she existed. The car slowed to a stop in front of a tall building that shimmered with wealth, its sleek entrance guarded not by uniforms, but by silence and eyes that noticed everything. Ryan didn't speak as he opened her door. Emily stepped out, uncertain whether she was walking into sanctuary or cage. The elevator ride was quiet, thick with the weight of unspoken things. She expected another safe house, maybe something nondescript, something forgettable. Instead, the doors opened into a luxury apartment too pristine to feel lived in. Every object was expensive, carefully chosen, and yet soulless. The kind of place where people went to disappear, not to breathe. Ryan didn't offer a tour. He simply walked toward the far window and stood there, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city below like he was searching for an answer he hadn't found in years. Emily wandered slowly into the space, eyes trailing over untouched books, a single cup on a marble counter, an ashtray with nothing inside it. She didn't ask questions. She was too tired to pretend she had any left. This wasn't home. This was a waiting room between one life and another, and the clock had stopped ticking. Ryan finally turned to her, but his gaze wasn't the same as before. It wasn't guarded or cold. It was searching. Stripped of the roles, the commands, the silent authority, he looked like a man who'd forgotten how to stand still. "No one else knows about this place," he said quietly. "Not even my father." Emily sat on the edge of the long leather couch, unsure what to say. "You don't trust many people," she replied. "I don't trust anyone," he corrected. "But you didn't ask to be here. That counts for something." He moved closer, but not too close. There was a caution in his steps, like he was afraid that proximity might shatter something between them. He rubbed a hand over his face and let out a breath that sounded heavier than it should have. "My mother used to make tea when I couldn't sleep," he said suddenly. "I hated the taste, but she swore it could quiet any nightmare." Emily blinked, surprised by the confession. She stood, walked to the kitchen without a word, and began searching through the cabinets. When she returned, she handed him a mug, steaming and imperfect. He stared at it like it held more power than a weapon. "She died when I was 10, Ryan said after a long pause. "Car accident. At least that's what they told me. I remember my father crying once, just once. After that, he never looked back." Emily sat beside him, not too close, letting the silence stretch between his sentences. "He built an empire after that, brick by brick, lie by lie, said we owed her a legacy. But what he meant was control, power, and I was his heir before I could spell the word." Ryan's voice didn't shake, but his grip on the cup did. Emily watched his fingers tremble against the ceramic. She didn't reach out. She didn't interrupt. He wasn't telling her this to get sympathy. He was telling her because there was no one else left to tell. "He thinks emotions are for the weak," Ryan continued. "That trust is for the poor. He looked at me every day like I was a project he hadn't finished. I tried to become the man he respected. I ended up becoming the man I feared." Emily felt something shift inside her, a quiet thread pulling tighter between them. She had expected danger from Ryan Callahan, not this raw, haunted version of him. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. Ryan looked down into the tea, then back at her. "Because you saw me at my worst, and you stayed. Not because you wanted to, because you didn't know what else to do. And that makes you the only person in my life who never asked me for anything." The words landed with more weight than she expected. Emily didn't know what to say. She didn't feel brave. She didn't feel wise. She had stitched up a man who was bleeding and then found herself caught in a world where her kindness had consequences. But now, sitting there beside him, she understood something deeper. Ryan wasn't trying to scare her away. He was trying to figure out if there was any version of himself that deserved to be known at all. She reached for the mug and refilled it with water. The kettle hissed behind her. When she returned, she handed it to him again. Steady hands meeting trembling ones. It wasn't a grand gesture, but in that small moment, something settled. A truce. A breath shared between two people who didn't know how to be safe, but were trying anyway. He set the cup down on the table and leaned back, eyes half-lidded but far from sleep. "You ever think about running away?" he asked. She smiled faintly, not with amusement but recognition. "Every day." He nodded slowly. "What stops you?" Emily paused. "Someone always needs something. A chart signed, a vein found, a life held together by tape and hope. There's always a reason to stay." Ryan let out a bitter chuckle. "My reasons to stay are all built on fear. Fear of what happens if I let go. Fear of who takes over if I don't." He turned toward her fully now, voice quieter. "But if I walked away from all of it, the money, the name, the bloodline, would you come with me?" The question caught her off guard. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't manipulation. It was a wound dressed like a wish. She looked at him, searching for the edge of a smile or the shadow of an ulterior motive. But there was only honesty, raw and fragile. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. For the first time since they met, Emily didn't know what to say. And Ryan, surprisingly, didn't push for one. He didn't speak again after that. He stood up, walked to the bedroom, and left the door open, not as an invitation, but as an act of trust. Emily sat alone, the silence thicker now, but not suffocating. Her eyes drifted to the untouched cup, the steam long gone. She thought about his question. Not because it flattered her, but because it terrified her, because part of her wanted to say yes, and another part still didn't know who he really was, or who she was becoming in his orbit. This place, with its thick walls and locked doors, wasn't a home. It was a waiting room for choices that hadn't yet been made, and sleep wouldn't come easy here, not for either of them. But something had shifted. Beneath the quiet, beneath the unsaid, a kind of understanding had taken root. She wasn't just hiding anymore. She was beginning to matter in a way that didn't require a medical chart or a bullet wound. And for Ryan, whose world was carved from violence and legacy, Emily had become something unexpected. Not a threat, not a liability, but maybe, just maybe, a reason to want something more. For the first time, he had asked her if she'd go with him, and for the first time, she didn't have an answer. The call came at exactly 3:03 a.m. Emily didn't need to hear the words to know something was wrong. Ryan was already sitting on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to his ear, expression unreadable but unmistakably darker than she'd ever seen. His back was tense, his jaw clenched. He didn't speak as he ended the call. He just stood up, walked to the closet, and began pulling on black clothes with the precision of someone who had done this before. Too many times, in too many places. "What happened?" Emily asked, stepping toward him. He didn't answer immediately, just slipped on his jacket, zipped it up, and finally looked at her. "There's been a breach," he said. "Someone on the inside." Emily felt her stomach twist. "Let me come with you." Ryan shook his head. "This isn't your world." She grabbed his arm. "That doesn't mean I can't see it." He hesitated. Not because he doubted her, but because some things couldn't be unseen. "Stay," he said. "Please." But Emily had stopped listening to orders the moment she realized that her life was now tied to his, not by force, but by choice. And some choices couldn't be undone. She followed him, quietly, slipping into the back seat of the car before he could stop her. Ryan didn't argue. He just closed the door beside her and gave the driver a sharp nod. The drive was wordless, but every mile built another layer of weight between them. Emily didn't ask questions, and Ryan didn't offer explanations. She understood that whatever they were heading into, it wasn't a conversation. It was a sentence. When they finally pulled up to the old industrial warehouse, Emily's chest tightened. It didn't look like anything, just brick and metal, just brick. But she could feel it. The tension, the danger, the history soaked into the walls. Inside there were men standing like shadows, watching. No one stopped Ryan. No one spoke. He moved like a ghost with authority, silent, lethal. Emily followed 2 steps behind, her heartbeat loud in her ears. They entered a wide, dim space where one single man knelt in the center of the room. His hands were bound, his shirt stained with sweat and humiliation. When he looked up and met Ryan's eyes, Emily saw recognition. Not just recognition, blood. The man was older, maybe late 50s, with tired eyes and a face worn by years of surviving a world that devoured its own. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Ryan, you don't have to do this." Emily froze. The man wasn't a stranger. "Uncle?" she whispered, though she knew it wasn't her place. Ryan didn't move. His face was carved from marble, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. "You gave our name to men who wanted to see me buried," Ryan said quietly. "You called me weak." The uncle didn't deny it. He bowed his head. "Because you are," he said, not cruelly, but with tired conviction. "You care too much, and in this world that'll kill you." Emily felt the chill of those words wrap around her like a chain. Ryan stepped forward. "You didn't just question me," he said. "You endangered everything she built." His voice shook then, not with fear, but with memory. "My mother trusted you." The uncle looked up again. "And she wouldn't want this." Ryan's hand hovered at his side. Emily reached for him, not to stop him, but to remind him he wasn't alone. He didn't look at her. One of Ryan's men handed him a gun. No words, no ceremony, just the cold finality of it. Emily wanted to scream, to intervene, to do something, but she knew this wasn't a moment that could be undone. The silence in the room was more deafening than any siren. "You were like a second father to me," Ryan said, voice barely above a whisper. His uncle nodded. "And if I could go back, I'd still try to protect you, even from yourself." That was the last thing he said. Ryan raised the gun. Emily looked away. The sound was fast, brutal, final. She didn't need to see to know what happened. She felt it in the way Ryan's hand trembled against hers when he finally reached for it. She looked at him then, expecting something, rage, relief, regret. But his eyes were empty, not cold, just void. Like something had been carved out of him and discarded, and in that emptiness, Emily felt something inside her fracture. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about what they were becoming just to stay alive. They walked back to the car together. No one else spoke. No one dared. Inside, Ryan sat in silence, staring at the gun still in his hand. Emily didn't say anything. There were no words strong enough to bridge the gap between what he had done and what it had cost. But she didn't pull away either. She reached for his hand again, slow and steady. He let her, and that alone said more than any confession could. "I thought I'd feel something," he said quietly. "But all I feel is less." Emily turned to him, her voice low. "Because you lost a part of yourself, and not just tonight." He looked at her, tired. "How long do you think we can do this?" She didn't answer, not because she didn't have one, but because they both already knew it. Not long, not like this, not with blood staining the seams of their days. What they had wasn't safety. It was a pause before the inevitable, and something had to break. The drive back was longer, or maybe it just felt that way. Ryan didn't speak again, neither did she, but when they finally reached the apartment and the doors closed behind them, Emily knew the silence wasn't peace. It was aftermath. Ryan sat on the couch without taking off his jacket. She walked to the kitchen and made tea again, her hands moving on instinct. When she brought it to him, he didn't take it right away. He just stared at the steam, then at her. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said. "But now that you have, you know why we can't wait." Emily nodded. She wasn't afraid of the blood. She was afraid of what it was turning him into, and maybe what it was turning her into too. She sat beside him, closer this time. He let his head fall back, eyes closed. She placed the tea in his hand even as it shook. No more questions, no more pretense. Just one truth between them now. Either they ran or they'd be swallowed whole. He held her hand tighter than before but didn't speak, because in that world, words were never enough, and the blood that ran through it always ran in silence. On their last night in Detroit, the city no longer felt like a battlefield, just a memory that refused to fade. The skyline still glowed in the distance as the car moved through half-lit streets. But Emily wasn't watching. Her eyes were on Ryan. He sat beside her in the back seat, head resting lightly against the window, his expression unreadable but less burdened than before. He hadn't said much since they left the apartment, just a quiet, "Let's go," like he was finally surrendering not to danger, but to the possibility of something else. There was no goodbye to the city, no dramatic gesture, just an exit, deliberate, unglamorous, and necessary. Emily didn't ask where they were going. The truth was, she didn't care. What mattered wasn't the direction. It was the decision, and the fact that he had made it with her. Not because she asked, not because he was desperate, but because somewhere in the chaos of their collision, something real had taken root, something worth protecting. As the car rolled farther away from the familiar, she felt her chest lighten. She had always assumed freedom would feel like escape. But it didn't. It felt like this. Ryan hadn't brought much. A duffel bag with clothes, a folder with forged documents, a phone he would soon throw into a river. But what he did carry was heavier than any of it. The guilt, the memories, the ghosts he didn't know how to bury. Emily knew better than to ask what he left behind. His silence said it all. His father's empire, the men who followed orders because they feared his last name, the weight of being Callahan. But in that moment, none of it sat between them. There was only the hum of the road and the quiet rhythm of something new beginning. He finally turned toward her, reaching for her hand. "You really don't have to do this," he said. His voice wasn't defensive or dismissive. It was sincere, frightened even. Emily gave a tired smile. "Neither do you." That made him laugh, the sound brief but real. "You think I know how to be anyone else?" She shook her head. "No, but maybe you don't have to be anyone else. Maybe just being you is finally enough." And for once, Ryan didn't argue. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a small yellow post-it note, something she had grabbed without thinking while rushing out of her apartment for what she knew would be the last time. She leaned forward, peeled off the backing, and stuck it to the sun visor above them. She didn't explain herself, just took a pen from her coat and wrote one word on it. Ryan. Not Callahan, not Heir, not the boy from Bloodlines or the man built from expectation, just Ryan. She caught him glancing at it, his eyes softening as he took it in. That's it? He asked. No middle name? No titles? She tilted her head. You wanted to start over, didn't you? He nodded slowly, then leaned back, one hand still gripping hers. Then let's do it right. No more labels, no more debts. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even loud, but it was the most honest moment they had shared. He looked at her like she was the first person to see him without reaching for a version of him she could control. And for the first time in his life, that didn't terrify him. It gave him peace. They stopped once at a roadside diner, not because they were hungry, but because they could, because now every decision was theirs. Ryan stayed in the car while Emily went inside. When she came back, she brought him coffee. No cream, no sugar, just how he never said he liked it, but she somehow knew. He took the cup, not thanking her with words, but with a look that said more than he ever could. What happens if someone recognizes me? He asked. She took a sip of her own drink. Then we move again. We keep moving until they can't find us, until even you forget who you were. He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. You're not afraid? Emily didn't answer right away. I was, she said finally. But being afraid didn't keep me safe. It only kept me small. Ryan looked away, nodding slowly. I don't want you to lose yourself because of me. She smiled. You didn't make me lose anything. You gave me something no one else ever has. He raised an eyebrow. What's that? A reason to stay. Back on the road, the night deepened. Emily drifted off for a few minutes, head resting against the window, only to wake with a jolt when she felt a hand cover hers again. Ryan wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight ahead, but his fingers gripped hers tightly. Then he guided her hand and placed it slowly against his chest. She didn't pull away. Beneath her palm, his heartbeat thudded strong and steady. He kept her hand there, as if needing her to feel that he was still human, still alive, still more than a name soaked in history and violence. This, he said softly, is the only thing that matters now. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. And as the car continued to glide across state lines and unspoken promises, Emily felt something shift. She wasn't running anymore. She was beginning. There was no plan, no timeline. Just the quiet hope that maybe, in this unmarked path, they'd find something resembling peace, and maybe even love. Not the kind written in fairy tales, but the kind built from scars and second chances. By the time the sun began to rise, casting light over a world that didn't yet know their names, Emily knew she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. She didn't want to. That was the most surprising part. For so long, she had waited for the moment where she would long for the life she left behind, the hospital, the routines, the silence of her apartment. But none of it called her back. Not anymore. She looked at Ryan again. Not the man she met bleeding on a hospital bed, not the heir to a violent empire, but the one sitting beside her now. Raw, honest, trying. That was enough. She squeezed his hand, and this time he looked at her with something close to vulnerability. You still don't know where we're going, do you? He asked. She smiled. No, but for the first time, I don't care. And that was the truth. As the car disappeared down the open road, the post-it still fluttered on the visor. Ryan. Just Ryan. No past, no crown. Just a man who had finally found someone who stayed, and a woman who, for the first time in her life, wanted to begin. What starts as an ordinary night shift takes a dramatic turn when a young nurse saves the life of a man brought in under mysterious, dangerous circumstances. Her actions that night set off a chain of events that draw her deep into the hidden world behind Detroit's power and crime. Days later, she's approached by the very man she saved, Ryan Callahan, heir to a criminal empire, and nothing in her life is ever the same again. What follows is a powerful journey of trust, fear, quiet gestures, and two broken people trying to find freedom in each other. Witness the emotional evolution of a bond formed in the shadows, tested by betrayal and strengthened by the courage to choose a new path. Share your thoughts in the comments. How would you react in such a moment of courage? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe on our channel for more inspiring stories that touch the heart and remind us of the good in humanity.